Uganda's inflation at 7.9% is among the lowest in Africa, but is still a major concern. Inflation originated in the rich countries. They responded to the 2020 pandemic with substantial fiscal packages of stimulus and to stave off the coming downturn in 2020. Eventually, this collided with supply-side constraints, pandemic-induced labor shortages, constricted supply chains, global supply chains, sporadic lockdowns, most persistently in China. All of these contributed to this clash between demand and shortages of supply. Clogged ports and labor shortages increased transport costs around the globe. In fact, the container price index increased some sevenfold after March 2020 and remains at that level today. To make matters worse, intermittent waves of new COVID variants have plagued progress towards a steady recovery. Then, just as the world was recovering from the Omicron variant in February, Russia invaded Ukraine. The war and subsequent international sanctions drove prices of oil through the roof, soon followed by precipitous rises in food prices. But it didn't stop there. If you think about it, the effective strangulation of trade together from Russia and Ukraine affects some 52% of the global supply of pig iron used in steelmaking, 48% of palladium used in autos, 40% of potash used in fertilizers, and many other commodities that are essential to inputs in manufacturing. These shortages drove inflation and compelled monetary authorities to tighten. The global slowdown will have knock-on effects on Uganda. Recession would mean that Uganda's exports, essential to driving growth, will face serious headwinds this year and next year. Already, Ugandan businesses report that export orders have fallen sharply in the last 3 consecutive months. Second, it will mean rising interest rates on foreign debt and increase the burden in the Treasury. Third, it will mean that the global supply of portfolio and foreign direct investment will likely to be even more constrained than before. And you know, global foreign direct investment flows were already at 76% of their 2015 peak coming into the pandemic. So now the situation is even tighter. With the tragic events in Pakistan this week, development assistance will likely come under severe pressure as resources are diverted not only to Pakistan but also Ukraine. That said, some distant glimmers of hope may presage light at the end of the tunnel. The price of oil and food have eased in recent weeks, and private forecasters are predicting that inflation should come down in the second half of this year. Moreover, Ugandan companies have expressed optimism in a recent business survey. 72% of respondents expect the Ugandan economy to pick up next year. Report that orders are likely to pick up, inflation is likely to ebb, and employment may increase. But one has to be wary of lights at the end of tunnels. It may be a train coming right at us in the form of a new external shock. And for that reason, the discussions in this conference on making the Ugandan economy resilient could not be more timely. In this world of heightened uncertainty, 3 policy areas discussed in this conference are particularly important. Efforts to promote exports and domestic value addition, measures to mobilize revenues to finance public investment, and finally, making the economy more resilient to climate change. Let me say a word about each. First, growing trade, exports and imports is central to the process of structural transformation and productivity growth in Uganda. One common features of countries that grew rapidly over a long period of time, Chile, China, Botswana, Mauritius, was the fact that their exports grew rapidly as well, often more rapidly than the overall economy themselves. We know that productivity of firms improves when they start selling to foreign buyers. Furthermore, a large literature shows that trade openness tends to increase wages, especially for skilled workers. So trade is critical to productivity, it's critical to growth, and it's essential to the creation of good jobs with high wages. Uganda has done pretty well in diversifying its portfolio over the last decade, and its exports have grown, particularly in services. And I was delighted to talk to Lily Ajarova about tourism here in Uganda, a major source of foreign exchange. They've also expanded some new commodity exports, including gold. Uganda has also successfully attracted considerable foreign investment. However, export growth has been substantially slower than the best performing developing economies around the world. Too reliant on coffee and a few bulk commodities with minimal in-country value addition. With global trade slowing and foreign direct investment becoming more selective, the country cannot simply rely on a global buoyant market to carry things forward. It will have to increase its global market share. The way to do this, increasing productivity relative to competitors and faster than competitors. The discussion later today in this conference focuses on ways to increase productivity and to add domestic value to exports, to use foreign direct investment to increase productivity, and to participate in global value chains. This conference will explore ways, as the Minister mentioned, that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement can create new opportunities for Ugandan exporters and for adding value to commodities. It will also explore ways that the parish development model can be used to propel growth. This leads me to the second topic, probably one that's dear to the heart of the Minister and the PS, taxes. Raising government revenues is important to finance public investment and to reduce the reliance on development assistance. Even without the pullback in development assistance from Africa, the flow of resources will naturally tend to, that is, development assistance resources, will naturally tend to attenuate over time. In fact, already donor support for the budget is down more than 25% this year relative to last year. The only solution to financing public investment over the long term is to increase taxes. Uganda collects only 11% of taxes as a share of GDP, well below the average for other countries' its per capita income. As a result, the level of public investment is also relatively low compared to other fast-growing countries. The program later this afternoon will discuss ways that Uganda can mobilize new revenue. One potential way to raise revenues is to reduce tax incentives, while many of them are, and while at the same time trying to make them more effective. Incentives in Uganda cost the Treasury at least 1.6% of GDP, and some estimates go up even higher than that. These are big numbers. The discussion today will focus on ways to get the maximum payoff from these expenditures. Similarly, the discussion will present some evidence that evasion of tariffs collected at the border is non-trivial. These are the challenges that the Ugandan authorities face and are areas where they're for future action. More public resources are also needed to cope with the other topic in this conference, external shocks, and particularly climate change. If there's one thing that the last 2 years have taught us, it's that the risk of external shocks is high, and ignoring their disruptive effects can be extraordinarily costly. One external shock that we know is coming, in fact is here, is climate change. In my own country, I've watched with anguish as forest fires in California burn ancient redwood groves. In Pakistan, we are witnessing floods that cover nearly 1/3 of the country. What one journalist called a climate change dystopia. Here in Uganda, we've also seen tragic effects as well. Earlier this month, the unusual flash floods in Mbale killed some 29 people and displaced thousands. Drought and floods are increasingly common. The temperature rise has been some 1.3 percentage points degrees Celsius since 1960. Events in Mbale might be the portent of future things to come. Projected climate change damages are pervasive and cover many sectors. In agriculture alone, for example, climate-induced losses for Arabica coffee production are expected to be around 10 to 50% by mid-century. Similarly, transport systems based on polluting fossil fuels that emit CO2, along with health damages, are really important and will undergo major shifts in production. Already we've seen in the industrial countries a very rapid move towards electrical vehicles. Africa has to be wary that investments in combustion engine car production may leave it behind in the global move and technological change in transport. On public finance, the effects of climate change will require investments to adapt to pressures that could increase debt levels. The economic costs of coping with climate change in Uganda could well surpass 2.5% of GDP in the coming years. The ongoing shock, unless offset with policies that will be discussed in the course of this conference, could likely derail Uganda's objective of becoming a middle-income country in the mid-2030s. The good news in all of this is the Ugandan government has formulated robust plans to deal with climate change. They have submitted the nationally determined contribution as part of the Paris Club that have raised a whole series of policies that, if enacted, could mitigate the effects of climate change. The agenda of this conference is to translate those very good plans into actionable items that can be incorporated into the budget. Even as we discuss these three critical areas, we should not lose sight of new opportunities that can provide a springboard into sustained growth. Let me highlight one. The pandemic, despite its severe human costs, has created new forms of communication. I'd wager that all of the computers we see here in the conference room have on them programs like WhatsApp, Zoom, Team, WebEx, Skype. My favorite is the ones the Brookings use called Blue Jeans. Virtually all of these are new ways of communicating globally, and these have created new access paths to information. In an instant, you can check out, whatever happened to Serena Williams at the US Open, but you can also, if you're a firm, find where to find the latest microchip and for your product that will improve it. Students can take courses now at the best universities around the world here in Uganda without having to pay the exorbitant tuition costs. E-commerce, mobile money, and new financial services are the dynamic sector of international markets. The opportunities for firms to harness information to increase their productivity is there for the seizing. As Bill Maloney, one of the foremost students of productivity growth in the world, has pointed out, the advent of high-powered computing and web connectivity constitute new tools for the rapid radiation of ideas and technologies to developing countries, and creates an opportunity for accelerating productivity growth of historic proportions. I have no doubt that this opportunity will be seized by Ugandans. In closing, on behalf of the International Growth Center, let me once again thank the Ministry of Finance for its persistence and attentiveness in preparing this conference, and thank you, the participants, for coming. I look forward to the next 2 days and the ideas that may emerge from this discussion.
Please do not tire from putting your hands together. So I want us to clap for Dr. Newfarmer. And as he said, my favorite one, be wary of the lights at the end of the tunnel. As we may be told, things are looking great and we will be out of this hole. It could be a train with a lot of bad news, and as Dr. Richard said, it could be the external shocks that are coming upon us, and I like that. I take the pleasure now to invite Ms. Mukami Kariuki, the country manager of Uganda for the World Bank, to make remarks on behalf of our local development partners. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause.
Good morning. Honorable Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the Minister of State for Planning, Members of Parliament, Deputy Governor, Bank of Uganda, the Permanent Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury, Ministry of Finance, other Permanent Secretaries, the Commissioner General for URA, representatives of local government, the private sector, civil society, citizens of Uganda, all protocols observed. Thank you very much for inviting me here today to speak on behalf of the Local Development Partners Group, represented by the members sitting in front of you here, from the Local Development Partners Group Committee. This is the 6th high-level growth conference and my first, so I'm happy to be here today to witness what has been the event that has carried the day in terms of sharing information on economic issues affecting the country. The Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development has organized these fora on a regular basis to tap into the knowledge from others, also to listen to stakeholders, and this therefore reflects a serious commitment that government places on growth and the dedication to the targets it sets itself to in the National Development Plan 3 and Vision 2040. This 6th conference is being held while Uganda and the world economy is recovering from the impacts of COVID-19 shocks, as well as more recent shocks arising from fuel and commodity price hikes and global supply chain and logistic constraints that have arisen from a series of events that were triggered by COVID-19. As development partners, we want to commend the government of Uganda for its cautious approach to economic management of the recent shocks by prioritizing macroeconomic stability over short-term solutions. We commend the government's recent fiscal consolidation effort, which we see as a responsible policy response to current day problems, and we congratulate the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development for its management of these issues. However, we also want to encourage the government to close remaining gaps, for example, by addressing the needs of the most vulnerable populations through stronger and better social protection systems, implementing pro-poor policies on health, and scaling up learning and education outcomes. We see these as critical to dealing with the compounded impacts of the multiple shocks faced by the country. Since the theme of this conference is building a self-sustaining economy to weather future shocks, we'd like to use this opportunity to provide some remarks which build on the previous Economic Growth Forum policy recommendations, as well as reflect on topics which are on the agenda for discussion today. Firstly, we are supportive of the effort to focus on green growth, and we note in particular the emphasis on renewable energy and climate adaptation and mitigation. The abundance of renewable energy resources continues to present a great opportunity for Uganda. More investments in renewable energy are needed. However, recent experience underlies the importance of ensuring any new infrastructure is climate resilient, so it can withstand the storms that we see emerging and continue to ensure production despite the weather impacts that we're facing. More investments are also needed to ensure all Ugandans have access to electricity through increased connectivity at least cost, so the extension of last mile connections is important. And in addition, Uganda would benefit from investing in all forms of renewable energy, and in particular solar for those who are far from the grid and will require alternative solutions. Since public funds are limited, mobilization of private investment and finance will be crucial to achieving this. So we encourage the government to work together with development partners, the private sector and other actors to leverage additional investments in this area. Secondly, boosting domestic resource mobilization. And we are pleased to see that Uganda is moving forward with the domestic revenue mobilization strategy 2019-20 to 2023-24, and support the aim, which is to increase the country's tax to GDP ratio from 11.4% to between 16 and 18% by 23-24, and achieve a tax to GDP ratio growth of 0.5% every financial year. To achieve these targets, we note that there's still need to build capacity in the Uganda Revenue Authority and the Tax Policy Department, and develop a tax policy strategy, the review of legal frameworks, and also new tax policy measures. Some development partners are already supporting this effort, and we will continue to be supportive of additional measures the government decides to take. With effective implementation of the local government revenue mobilization strategy, local governments should also be able to increase their own source revenue, thus contributing to the overall tax mobilization effort. In addition, the ongoing discussions around the integrated national financing framework to strengthen planning processes and overcome existing impediments to financing the Sustainable Development Goals provides a platform to engage further on how local governments can be supported to be more self-reliant. Development partners remain available for deeper discussions on the integrated national financing framework, including looking at other development financing options such as PPPs, blended financing, philanthropy, remittances, and promoting FDI. On management of tax exemptions, we encourage the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development to expedite the development and implementation of a tax exemption rationalization plan that identifies tax exemptions that can be rationalized to contribute to revenue collection, the revenue collection objective. Excuse me. Thirdly, we would like to also support the effort to scale up trade and exports. I think in support of what we've heard earlier from both the Minister and Mr. Newfarmer. We agree that trade is key to economic recovery, and Uganda's in particular, being a landlocked country. And we see that firms require export opportunities to overcome the limitations of a relatively small domestic market. So the effort to see how to benefit from both the current high global prices for some export products, but also to use the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement to increase exports within the region are also critical. And while agricultural products are going to be the basis and foundation for this, because of the competitive advantage Uganda has, we also encourage moving beyond to value addition to increase the range of products exported and the value of those products. We encourage the Ugandan government to improve the country's competitiveness, therefore, and work with East African countries to improve trade relations and minimize the non-tariff barriers to trade. In addition, the government can also benefit from establishing more export processing zones and accompanying programs to address the sanitary and phytosanitary measures to boost exports. Ensuring product quality through certification is therefore key, and institutions such as the Uganda National Bureau of Standards need to be supported to ensure that these things are accelerated within the shortest time possible. Fourthly, domestic value addition. And in this regard, Uganda's value proposition has enormous potential for expansion. And we see opportunities in cotton ginning, tea processing, coffee hulling, tobacco handling and processing, beverages, and the dairy subsector as perhaps the low-hanging fruit. But there are significant challenges to be addressed through improving access to agricultural financing, supporting research and innovation, vocational skills training, investment in marketplace development, and integrating irrigation in the production system. Greater effort is also required to integrate smallholder farmers in the value addition drive, and in this regard, to boost and build agricultural productivity through investment in research, promoting good agricultural and climate-smart farming practices, and therefore the importance of extension services is critical. And then I think the fifth point perhaps is something that we would like to add to the agenda more firmly, which is investing in human capital. And Uganda's population increase, I think, warrants greater attention to trying to, especially to catch up with the 2-year gap that emerged through COVID-19, with close to 70% of the future population being of working age and residing in urban centers. Education, not just at the primary and secondary education level, but vocational and university need to be supported. This presents an enormous opportunity to invest in human capital so that the soon-to-be working age population will have the skills and health necessary to be fully productive and contribute to the country's growth. Given that the fiscal space for human capital development remains tight, we see some opportunity to look at fiscal spending to identify where increases in expenditure on human capital can be made. In closing, let me just say that the Local Development Partners Group welcomes the invitation to this excellent conference. We'd like to thank the government of Uganda and the International Growth Center for their invitation, and the UK for its generous funding towards this event. We trust that some of the key recommendations generated from this conference will help to guide the budgeting process for the coming financial year, and we believe that progress in key areas is obviously going to be a joint effort of all of us in this room. Local development partners are and will continue to collaborate with the government in this regard, and we stand ready to consider how best to continue to coordinate our efforts between us and also amongst us in order to have the desired impact. We hope that existing fora such as the Economic Management Group and also the National Partnership Forum will provide productive platforms for enhanced dialogue and collaboration, and we look forward to continued collaboration and cooperation with all of you in the room here today. So thank you very much, and with those remarks, I beg to leave the floor.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I now want to turn to our first plenary session, which will be chaired by the Executive Director of Research at the Bank of Uganda, Dr. Adam Mugume. As Dr. Adam comes forward, because he will be chairing this session, his only panelist is the PSST. Dr. Adam, I need to mention that be mindful that the PSST is also sitting on the board of the Bank of Uganda. So be careful with the questions when they start coming after his presentation. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me Dr. Adam Mugume, who will be chairing this session.
Thank you very much. My work is very easy this morning. It is like the work of John Baptist who went before Jesus. My work is only to invite the Messiah, who is PSST, to give us his address. PSST.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adam Mugume, the Honorable Minister of State for Economic Planning in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, all my colleagues, the permanent secretaries, because I don't see members of Parliament, but if they are there, you are very most welcome. The DST, the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Dr. Newfarmer, the Director for IGC, Ms. Mukami, and all of the development partners I see in the room. All of the heads of government, departments and ministries present, the private sector. I can see the chairman, my chairman of the Presidential CEO Forum, and all the members of civil society. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for responding to our invitation. I'm going to present the first paper, which is about experience of this country, of Uganda, how we responded to the recent global and domestic economic shocks. And my presentation, I don't know whether this thing is working. Is it on? Okay. So my presentation is going to run around 4 key areas. I will highlight the recent global shocks and their impact on both the global economy, but in particular on our economy, and then how we responded as government of Uganda to these shocks and how we are still responding, and then the lessons that our response could offer, and the key actions which we are undertaking to rebuild resilience of our economy going forward. In summary, the economy of Uganda, like every other economy in the world currently, I usually tell people we no longer have something called the Ugandan economy. It's a global economy, because whatever happens, even in very far places like the US, Canada, UK, and so on, in Asia, it ends up affecting us here in one way or another. So that slide shows the summary of the key shocks which we have faced in recent times, in the previous 2 to 3 years. First, the COVID-19 pandemic, which we all know has disrupted our supply networks across the world, and also it has affected the demand for our exports in some markets. Some of this demand has been positive though. For example, on coffee, as we shall see the numbers. We have also seen our foreign direct investment across the world impacted, as well as remittances from Ugandans who are sweeping in other countries, as we call it, who are working and sending money home. That has reduced a bit in recent years, but it is picking up, as I will show you. But also there has been opportunities presented by the COVID-19, especially on import replacement. We have now built capacity to produce goods that we were not producing prior to the pandemic. The second major shock we've had is the increase in the commodity prices. This has led to inflation, which we are currently facing, and much of this inflation is imported. As the executive director here of research will tell you, they are the guys who are monitoring most of these things. Most of the inflation we've had is coming because of fuel, the fuel prices, which have increased due to a combination of the disruption in the supply chains by COVID, but also the emerging challenge of Russia-Ukraine conflict. And then we have also had a number of raw materials that we use to produce here, the crude oil by industrialists who are producing our, for example, laundry, bar soap, cooking oil, and so on. Those were affected and the prices went up. We have been explaining this for some time. So as a result of this, we have had inflation in Uganda rising also, as I'm going to show you the numbers later. Then increase in interest rates is another global shock now. As a way of the world responding to the high inflation, they have increased interest rates, which has increased the cost of borrowing across the world, and also reduced the access to global capital, because a number of firms and individuals who are investing in our portfolios here, they have now gone and invested in those markets which they deem to be more stable, because of the high rates now on the return on money in the US, in Europe, and other markets. So those developed countries have seen a reversal of flow to themselves instead of coming to the low income and emerging economies like ours. Another global shock we are monitoring is the increase in debt. Sovereign debt across the world is rising in almost every single country, except very few, if at all, as I will show you some numbers later. And then climate change effects, which already the previous presenters have hinted on. These have resulted in a gradual withdrawal of financing to non-renewable energy projects. The president, when he was addressing the country recently, he gave us an update on the drop in the investment, level of investment in fossil energy explorations. New explorations are now not coming on board as fast as they were because of the climate change effect, and this has an effect on us, but also scaling up the access to climate finance, which has now come in. Now, this technology of my people, the volume of world trade and industrial production looks like this. You see that in the period of around 2008 to 2010 there, because of the financial crisis, there was a huge V-shaped drop in both world production, industrial production, as well as the global trade. Almost a similar trend, a mirror image of 2008-10 has come back in 2020 until almost now. We saw a V-shaped drop in both the industrial production as well as the trade. So the world all of a sudden couldn't sustain production of most of the manufactured goods. And also the level of trade went down because of the lockdowns and their disruptive nature of so in other words, the mirror image of the financial crisis is the COVID disruption. It's another, this thing of yours is not working, my people. Can you run from there? I'll tell you next. there. So we have the detail of what I've been talking about. The first major shock we are experiencing, and it is affecting us up to now, is this COVID-19. Our supply networks have gone. However, it has also presented an opportunity for us in a way that we have replaced a lot of our imports. We didn't import sanitizers here. We didn't import PPEs. We didn't import a number of things which our local producers, like my good sister here, Madame Murwana, have been producing locally now. They have built capacity to replace, and that's an opportunity. We have also seen low demand for a cross-section of exports, but coffee, tea, and a few other agricultural commodities have actually performed quite well. That's why our export performance has not been very bad during the pandemic and recent shocks, because the world prices of these commodities increased as countries went into lockdowns. And as I'm going to show you later, our government took a deliberate policy to leave cargo moving, and it was a wonderful visionary decision. In some countries, they closed everything, including cargo, and they got their economies battered so much. For us, the cargo moved, and we managed to take advantage of these prices which were rising, but also the volumes of like coffee have also been growing. And the FDI and remittances, I talked about them. On the commodity prices, I've already told you the imported nature of our inflation. That's why even the way we respond has to be a very well carefully designed policy. I will tell you later why we didn't do some of the things which some people wanted us to do. Now, the third one, in a bid to tame the inflation, countries have increased the interest rates. In USA, for example, the benchmark rate have gone up to around 2.25 to 2.5%. This is the highest they have seen in the US since 2008. Similarly, in the UK, their benchmark rate now is about 1.75%, one of the highest since 2008. The implication of this is increased the cost of borrowing on us, because now the finances, the global financial market is looking at those markets which are quite more expansive and safer. And also it has reduced our access to the capital, as I said, due to the reversal or the reversed flow of the capital. Next, we have increase in debt. In most of these countries, IMF has already told us that the global debt has reached a record $303 trillion. That's the global debt today, according to IMF, $303 trillion. I don't know whether we can translate that in Ugandan shillings. It can't fit on a calculator. Well, anyway, it's huge amounts of money. This is debt, by the way, by governments, by businesses, and households. Don't think it is only the government debt. It includes also the businesses and households. Of this, the highest borrowers in the world, of course, are countries like Japan, with a debt to GDP ratio of 257%, Sudan about 210%, Greece 207%, Eritrea 175%, Cape Verde 161%. Now, that's debt to GDP ratio. Sometimes some people say, then why are we so worried? when I was about 48% of GDP. Please, I wanted to use this opportunity to tell fellow Ugandans that although we use the debt to GDP ratios, they are not the best way of managing debt. Because number one, the GDP is not a government resource. GDP does not belong to government. And yet it is government which is going to repay the debt. That's why we need to start looking at the debt service more than the debt to GDP. So how much of the revenue we collect is spent on servicing the debt? That's where we are mainly looking at. And I will show you the numbers later. But when it comes to debt to GDP ratio, there are those countries which are already very much up there, but they have more ability, some of them, to actually service their debt because of the fact that they can go to the market without disrupting the private sector and be able to do that. We have also seen, because of this increased debt, reduced fiscal space and fiscal flexibility. Many countries do not have the flexibility to do what they would want to do. The climate change effects, I already talked about them. Let us move to domestic shocks. Now you realize that because I've told you the Ugandan economy is a mirror image of the global, whatever has been happening at the global level has come down, the pass-through effect came down to us. And in the first major outcome was the drop in the growth. Our growth went down like a pack of cards from 7.7, these are calendar year growth numbers. In 2019, Ugandan economy, our GDP was growing at 7.7%, calendar, not financial. But this went to minus 1.4% in 2020 as a calendar year growth performance. But Ugandan economy, because of our resilience, we recovered quickly. It is a V-shaped recovery. We recovered, and last year, calendar year, 2021, we grew by 5.1%. But as a financial year, we grew by 4.6%. But in that period of January to December 2021, our economy grew by 5.1%. This year, 2022, the projection, there will be a slight reduction in growth to 4.9%, but we expect it to recover in next year in 2023 back to our target growth of about 6.5%. Going forward, we are above the target of 6%, as the numbers are showing there. Next, we have also seen increased poverty, particularly in rural areas, due to the low demand for farm produce during the COVID period. The numbers by our National Household Survey of 2019-20 found that prior to COVID, the overall poverty had reduced from 20.3 to 18.7%. This is Household Survey 2019-20. So before COVID, had COVID not hit us, our poverty numbers now would have been 18.7%. But because of COVID, our poverty during that period of COVID increased to 21.9%, almost 22%. And that map shows you the distribution of the poverty across the country. The darker the color, the higher the poverty. The lighter the color, the lower the poverty. Next, We also lost jobs. We lost jobs as a result of this shock of COVID. Some estimates by researchers, Economic Policy Research Center, our research center at Makerere University, and the United Nations Capital Development Fund, they carried out studies which found that about 110,000 jobs were lost in that 1 year of the pandemic, especially when we had active lockdowns. However, we have had a quick recovery in terms of the jobs coming back online until these other shocks came in. But also we had the challenge of school dropouts and premature pregnancies, and the numbers have already been given by the relevant ministries, departments and agencies on children not returning to school after COVID, and also government-aided schools getting crowded because some private schools failed to reopen. We have also had adverse impact on our domestic revenue mobilization by the COVID, and this one I'm going to illustrate it later with the numbers. The multilateral financial institutions, however, came to our rescue, particularly the IMF and the World Bank. They responded by providing some required financing at lower concessional rates. And this has helped us to keep resilient. Next. Now, these are the revenue numbers I wanted to show, that our revenue mobilization was affected by COVID. When you check the year 2019-20, you see a drop in our revenue growth. We see there a growth on revenue reducing from 17.7% in 2018-19 to only about 3% in 2019-20. And in that year, we had a revenue shortfall of 3 trillion, over 3 trillion shillings. We didn't collect it in 2019-20 in the table below. We also see that that shortfall has persisted. Last year, the other year, 2020-21, the shortfall was 2.2 trillion shillings, but last year we saw the shortfall reducing to just 592 billion shillings. So we are really recovering very well in our revenue collection. Next. As the revenue was dropping, expenditure was increasing because we needed to keep Ugandans alive. So government had to spend money on especially Ministry of Health and also on governance and security to keep you Ugandans at your homes so that you don't move around to spread the virus. Those SOPs. Now, that led to the expenditure on COVID as a percentage of the overall government expenditure to rise from 1.1% in 2019-20 to 7.4% in 2020-21. Although it has slightly reduced last year to 3.4, that is still significant expenditure of keeping the economy open with the people also safe. That's what actually that means. Next. Now, because revenue had reduced and yet expenditure on COVID increased, this increased our public debt and also the cost of servicing that debt. We saw the debt to GDP ratio moving from 41% prior to COVID to 47% in 2021, as those bars are indicating. And on the next slide, we show you a much clearer picture on how our debt has moved. The blue bars, they show you the debt to GDP ratio. The orange bars, they show you the deficit, the fiscal deficit to GDP. And then the line, the red line, is showing you the debt service to revenue. Now, you see that all of them have grown between 2019-20 to date. There has been a substantial increase in debt and also some increase in the fiscal deficit. The debt to GDP ratio increased to about 47% in 2021-22, and we expect it to hover around the 50%, which is our target threshold. However, we are determined to keep it within that range, as according to our Charter for Fiscal Responsibility, which already Parliament approved. So we are having a constraint, therefore, on the fiscal space that we have to borrow more, because of mainly that red line, the red line you see. Because I told you it's the most important measure now of our ability to service the debt. How much are we spending on servicing the debt? When you look at the left axis of the graph, that is the number. We are hitting 30% of our revenue servicing the debt. And we don't remember our Charter for Fiscal Responsibility is to keep it around 20%. So we'd want to scale down on that. Next, the climate change effects. I've already talked about them and others. We have had a seasonality in Uganda. Seasonality is a combination of drought and floods. And this has affected our main economic activity of agriculture, resulting in food shortage and the rising prices of food, which are feeding into the inflation we are having. The headline inflation last month was 7.9%. We are waiting in a few days, I think tomorrow or the other day, UBOS will tell us how we are faring this month of August. We are ending today, but there has been increase in inflation, mainly because of food and fuel, among other few items. But the key drivers have been those two. But also climate change diverted resources, as I told you, to deal with emergencies. We have been spending resources on supplementary budgets, on food and also on floods. The floods hit Mbale recently. We had to rescue the people there. We had also food challenges, especially in the Karamoja area. We had to buy food for them with the support of our development partners as well, whom we thank so much. The tightening further the fiscal room or space that is available is also in a way feeding into our challenges that we have. The details, all of the details here, they are explaining one fact, that when climate change came in, hit us, and with also the combination of inflation at fiscal level, we are managing in very tight spaces. Next, we have also had geopolitical conflicts, especially we had the regional ones insecurity within the region. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, our soldiers are operating there. Not because they want to operate from there, but to ensure that we are peaceful here. We had the terrorism tendencies, and this means more expenditure. We had also disruptions in regional trade and non-tariff barriers, with some countries closing borders. Have since reopened them. We had also some stopping our goods from going to their markets. But we have since resolved some of these issues, and we are hopeful that these shocks will allow us to now respond better. Now, I want to turn to the last bit of the presentation, how we have responded to these shocks as government. In the short to medium term, we have responded first by sticking to good economics, sound and appropriate fiscal and monetary policies, so that we can be able to mitigate both the impact of COVID-19 as well as the inflation. We have resisted the temptation by some people to have us go away from economics into common sense. And we decided to stick to the economics of ensuring that we use policies that are underpinned by research to respond. With the monetary policy now of the central bank, when the inflation started to rage, they have revised the policy rates upwards, like other countries are doing elsewhere in the world, those which are reasonable countries. Our central bank rate, as I'm going to show you on a graph somewhere, has been when we had COVID and we wanted the economy to support the businesses to survive, and also the financial institution to remain stable, the central bank responded, and the government also followed suit. How did the central bank respond? By reducing the CBR, so that the cost of money reduces on businesses, for them to be able to get cash flow and recover. When the inflation hit us, the central bank responded by increasing that CBR, as I'm going to show. That's what we have been doing. On the fiscal side, the same. When COVID hit us and businesses were at the verge of collapse, government responded by borrowing more to support the businesses, to support the economy, to remain afloat. That means more expenditure at a time of low revenue, which I have shown you. We had to manage the deficit. Now, today, when inflation is rising, government has responded by cutting expenditure, so that we borrow less to support the central bank to manage the inflation. So we are sticking to appropriate policies. Number two, we avoided measures that could lead to longer run distortions. These are the ones which I was talking about. That common sense can tell you, if you provide subsidies to buyers of fuel, you will support them to access fuel at affordable prices. That is wrong economics. It doesn't work. And we avoided it. Tax cuts. We are saying cut the taxes so that we can get fuel at a cheaper price, or we can get crude oil at a cheaper price. We made the analysis and we found that that would be very dangerous for us. The fiscal deficit would widen further and government would run out of money to support the economy to be able to recover. Price controls, there are those even who suggested price controls, that you control the price. Tell the sellers of fuel that from today, a liter should be 3,000. That's terrible economics. Why? Because you cause more demand and less supply of fuel, and the country will run out of fuel. Some countries which did that, they are the laboratory. You can watch what has happened there. The third one was to maintain a competitive environment so that we can support continuous supply of goods and services. Our main policy here in Uganda is to ensure that the market and the price mechanisms are not distorted, so that we can be able to keep the goods flowing. However much they are in low supply, let them not completely disappear from the market. So the best policy to respond is to ensure that the low supply of goods corresponds to low demand of those goods. That's why government has managed expenditure now. We are giving government less fuel, government people less fuel money to buy less fuel. But if they were demanding everybody fill the tank, then we would be in trouble where the demand is higher than the supply. We don't want the demand to outstrip supply. Next, we have also supported production, increased the production, because remember this inflation is mainly supply side inflation. As the central bank responds short term to manage the inflation, and we are also supporting them, we need to treat the disease. The disease is low supply. So we are supporting production of food, the production of manufactured goods, so that we can have now domestic supply increasing. And that's the more sustainable way of dealing with the shocks we've had. Next. This is the monetary policy I was talking about. Graphs speak clearly. When COVID hit us, the central bank reduced the policy rate we call central bank rate, which central bank rate kind of advises commercial banks on how they should behave when they are setting their lending rates. When it reduces, it's a signal to them that reduce the lending rate. And that's what we did during COVID. It reduced from 8 in April of 2021 to 6.5 in June, just recently. But now, the bank also provided, next, some exceptional funding facilities to maintain smooth access to money by the supervised financial institutions. It relaxed a bit on its policy with which they use to manage commercial banks, so that the commercial banks can have more liquidity during the COVID to support the businesses. But also to aid the borrowers, the central bank also provided what we call credit relief measures. These permitted banks to reschedule their loans for over a year. Rescheduling loans like postponing the problem, at least. Don't pay now, pay in the future, so that you can remain with enough cash flow. And they did exactly that. Next. Yes, those are the, next please, whoever, those graphs there, they are showing what the restructuring did to save the businesses. Of course, you can see on the right-hand side, there has been some increase in the non-performing loans. The portfolio which was non-performing increased from 4.2% in 2019 to 5.5% in 2020, the peak there. Then reduced to 5.2. That is still high, but it would have been worse had the central bank not done what you are seeing on the left in terms of the restructuring, allowing banks to allow creditors, rather the borrowers, to suspend payment. Next. Now, recently, as a result of the increase in inflation, the headline there should have been a mitigation of the price shocks. When the price shocks came in now, the inflation we are talking about, when prices started rising everywhere, the central bank has revised the policy rate upwards from 6.5% in May now to 9%. The representative of the governor is here. We will tell you where else it is going from here, because the custodian of those numbers. Next. The government, as I've told you, has also cut expenditure in Q1 of this financial year to support the monetary policy actions. We want to align ourselves to the monetary policy. When they are mopping out money, it would be disproportionately very counterproductive for us as government to pour more money in the economy. That would fail the monetary policy, and inflation would rise much faster. So we aligned to the Bank of Uganda policy to first get out the inflation. I've been telling people again and again that I know we have so many issues in the country. Some people are saying, when you give us less money, we shall not be able to support you to grow the economy. Others are saying, you are going to cause unemployment. Others are saying, interest rates, they are also affecting us as businesses. I would like to respond as follows. All of those issues I've mentioned, if we use the analogy of diseases, they are all diseases. Low growth is malaria. High interest rates is the flu. Unemployment is a Nagana. Inflation is cancer. Which of those diseases I've mentioned may you choose to suffer from? That's all economics demands us to do. Do you choose to suffer from cancer, from malaria, from flu, or from sleeping sickness? You sleep and you wake up. What do you want to suffer from? So in Uganda, we are saying, at any one point in time, if we have opportunity to avoid the cancer, first cancel out that disease. And that's why inflation is the first on the list of those shocks that we don't want to be in our economy. We have also focused expenditure now on growth-enhancing sectors with higher multiplier effects in the economy. As going forward in the medium term, the fiscal space which we have, which is very tight, will be mainly preserved for those sectors with the best bet on bringing the high multiplier. That when I spend money as government, that money will multiply several times to create growth and jobs and incomes and exports. And that's why this forum is going to guide us on where we should spend more, where we should spend less, among other fora which we have. In the medium term, we hope to stick to the same strategy. Next, and I'm now concluding with the lessons. First of all, Uganda, if any lesson can be gotten from us, is the stable political environment, but which political class also needs to be decisive and also communicates the key messages effectively. This is what we saw during COVID-19. Uganda was among the countries that was least affected by COVID-19 in the world. Not because of luck that we prayed so much and so on, of course we prayed, but because the political class that is leading the country was very decisive on this matter, and also very effectively communicated the messages, especially on the justification of SOPs. We started staying home happily when the message became very clear on the danger we were facing. In other countries, they were facing it rough to keep people home because of, I think, lack of clear communication, and also telling the people the cost-benefit kind of analysis of this. The second one is evidence-based actions. In Uganda, we want to usually to use evidence when we are making decisions, especially those decisions which are going to affect other people. You know, medical doctors use evidence to treat people. But remember, a medical doctor may make a mistake based on evidence also. But even if he made a mistake, that mistake will kill one person at a time. For an economist, you are not having that room of making mistakes, because you can kill entire generation, can kill all the businesses. That's why evidence is so critical. And going forward, this evidence will be our main recourse when we are analyzing and taking decisions. Thirdly, sticking to macroeconomic stability as the overriding goal. Macroeconomic stability. This is not theory, it's the life of people. They depend on a stable environment, low inflation, sustained growth, and affordable cost of living. This should depend on sound economic policy, not on common sense. The other, next, no, that one I finished. Give me another one. I have the close coordination between fiscal and monetary policies. Close coordination between us at the ministry and government at large with the central bank. It's a lesson we should really carry forward. If government does something which is contrary to what the central bank is trying to do, that will be very counterproductive, and we are going to find the economic management very much distorted. The other one is budget prioritization. Another lesson, budget prioritization. In Uganda, we have repurposed the budget by moving resources from certain areas which used to be priorities prior to COVID to other areas which are now emerging priorities. That has led to fiscal flexibility. In other words, budgets are not cast in stone. That word, this is my budget, kills economies. Your budget doing what? Priorities have shifted. If we say the priority is health, then money should move from certain expenditures to health, to keep the people alive. If we get away with COVID, then health should not say this is my budget. Then resources should move to go to where now the priority is, transforming the economy. The other lesson is, and this one is personal, avoiding panic. The Ugandan policymakers avoided panic in the midst of so much going on in the world and across our neighbors, gave messages of hope to the population as well as the economy so that we can have the entire population of Uganda understanding why we are taking certain decisions. Of course, strengthening safety nets, which Madam Mukami has been talking about here. Social protection of our people, especially those who are most vulnerable. We did that, and we are going to continue to do the same. But also taking advantage of the opportunities presented by the problem. We refused in Uganda to just look at COVID-19 and disinflation as a problem which is going to kill us. We also looked at the opportunity in it. We didn't want to waste a very good crisis. And lastly, digitization. Digitization of the economy. In conclusion, the key action is to build resilience. Number one, domestic revenue mobilization. We are working very, very hard now to ensure that our domestic revenue mobilization strategy is implemented and implemented effectively. We have set up a team of very smart younger Ugandans to help us and collect more revenue without hurting the economy. So they have to make good analysis on where we are collecting this revenue. We are also looking at these tax expenditures which the development partners and Mr. Newfarmer, Dr. Newfarmer have been talking about. We are looking at them. We are trying to analyze and see when we offer a business, an investor, a tax exemption, and that investor is promising to do certain activities, to employ a certain number of Ugandans, to create a certain multiplier in a certain sector. Are they doing that? We are putting in place that framework to ensure that we strengthen what we have been doing. And at the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, this is a top on the agenda. Our ministers have already tasked all of us, the technical people, to ensure that this is done. Ensuring fiscal sustainability, especially debt sustainability. Uganda is one of those countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have put top on agenda the issue of debt sustainability. I know many Ugandans are concerned about the rate at which the debt has grown in recent years, especially that period of COVID. But I want to assure you, we are going to stay sustainable within the chart of fiscal responsibility. And we are among the best also in the region. Maintaining macroeconomic stability, that goes without saying. We are continuing with our coordinated effort with the central bank to keep the financial markets resilient and stable, to keep the real economy stable, so that we can support the private sector efforts to do business. Trade openness and access to markets. Ugandan economy will stay open. We have an open capital account, and also we have a very liberalized environment. That will help us to continue being resilient. Digitizing the economy is also top on our agenda. As you know, we have supported the digitization efforts, and we are investing now in big projects to increase the strength of our internet and help businesses to go In government, we are also digitizing government. Government has been automated. Procurement, now money, as far as money is concerned, the payment system is fully digitized. In government, there is no cash. Money moves in IFMIS. Although I've been told sometimes it drops out of IFMIS in certain areas. We shall be clogging those areas to ensure that there is transparency, and also we reduce personal interface with money, because that's where the problems come in. We are also leveraging private sector financing to finance public investments, and we have already put in place a framework. We are coming to the private sector for this conversation. Attracting the development of new technologies to keep with the rapidly changing global environment. On the labor force, we are equipping more skills to cope with domestic, regional, and global labor needs. Adaptation to the environment is also very critical. We are moving from mitigation to adaptation. How can we use our environment sustainably? We don't stop development, but the development is done within the environmental limits. So wetlands, they are no-go area. Wetlands. The President has already directed all of us in the government to ensure that wetlands are reclaimed. We plant more. Uganda is one of the green countries in the world. We want it greener because we don't have any other choice. If you think that the environment is not as important as money, you try to count your money while holding your breath, and you see how far you can go. Hold your breath and count the money. You realize that at a certain point you will not be able to continue counting the money. So environment is so critical. Lastly, we are also strengthening data and information systems for better targeting of government programs. We would want to see most of the programs data-driven so that we can build an evidence-based economy. I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, PSST. Another clap of hands, please, for him. I think every time PSST speaks, he always proves the doubters that he is still a teacher, although people also doubt whether he is a teacher of economics or politics. But I think he is a teacher of economics still. So his presentation is clear and straight to the point. We are going to take a few questions. I think Maurice, I don't know where he is. I think he will give us a few minutes for questions. But as I was seated there, I already, first of all, PSST allowed me to divorce being your employee for 5 seconds as I take questions. And the first two questions came when I was seated there. One was, you were talking about this growth every now and then, but we don't feel growth in our pockets. What is your response to that? The second question was, but hold on, we are doing a tightening of belts, but we are also seeing four-wheel drives on the road by red number plates. How do you reconcile that as fiscal tightening? Those were two first questions. I will come other questions.
You're spot on, Doctor. Doctor, I'm on this side. I'm on this side, Doctor. You know, there was a trending video yesterday of VX is living somewhere. I won't mention where, but
So please.
It is good you are relating with the pain on the street.
Please, in interest of time, I don't know how many minutes will you give us? We are out of time. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, PSST. Just quickly, on attracting and developing new technologies, I would urge government to move seriously in terms of irrigation and accessing irrigation technologies to our farmers, because that's very critical to increase production. But PSST also, I think you should have also talked about public administration, public expenditure. I think it is too high, and it resonates with the four-wheel drives that we are talking about. It is still, and you have actually avoided that one. On climate change, government has done its knee-jerk approach. One time the president will come and make a statement, afterwards it fizzles out. And this has been consistent. Climate change is real. You've seen what has happened in Pakistan. Imagine that 30% of our population, of our land mass underwater. So I think we need to be serious on responding, including creating that climate fund, which can be matched by development partners, so that we access that money to respond to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. Thank you. Dr. Binom Shahata from Accord.
Just a minute. Yes, you had picked. Let me come to Mukunda. I am trying to balance the, with the gender.
Sure,
yes. Honorable Victoria.
Thank you very much. I'm Victoria Sectoreko, the chair of the Uganda Good Business Alliance and the vice chair of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. Now, I'm really happy I'm here so that I can hear what is going on firsthand instead of being told third hand. Mr. Newfarmer made several comments, but I'm only going to comment on his comment on coffee, where he said that Uganda is too reliant on coffee. So the question that jumped in my head when I heard that was, is that why the government is he one of the advisors who may have advised the government of Uganda to go slow on coffee by merging it with Maif so that they can slow down? UCDA was driving too fast. That is my first comment. Then two, on taxes. Increase taxes. Everybody, the PSST is saying increase taxes. World Bank is saying increase taxes. But the question I'm asking is, who is increasing the capacity of the taxpayers? Can we emphasize, prioritize increasing the capacity and numbers of taxpayers? Thirdly, is it possible for the organizers of this forum to start today organizing for a paper called DDI, Direct Domestic Investment? It would be nice if Ugandans were told, this year we have invested so much in private investors who are indigenous. It is okay to hope and pray that foreign investors will come. But what is wrong with us? We are really able-bodied and we can do business. Fourthly, we are talking about building capacity of URA to collect more taxes. Really, for us in agriculture, when you are looking after cattle, instead of getting a very good milker as in a person who milks the cow, we get a good milker as in a cow which gives a lot of milk. So is it possible for us to build, to plan, to make sure that we have more cash cows rather than better milkers as in URA? Finally, we are talking once again about human capacity. Uganda currently has a stunting rate of children of 20 to 25%. The problem with stunting is that it starts in the brain, and once you are stunted, you can never catch up. So when the PSST was talking about the effects of the pandemic and the inflation and the climate change, all these have had a big impact on the Ugandans' diet. Most of us Ugandans want our food fresh daily and want to eat and really enjoy life. But because of what has happened, most homes have cut the amount of food they eat and even the type of food they eat. This is inevitably affecting our immunity, and as a result, we are falling sick more often. We are ending up in hospital together with the economy. In other words, that is why the Uganda economy is sick.
Yes, it's one. My name's Julius Mukunda.
from CS Bag. PSST, I loved your analogy of the disease. Definitely, I wouldn't want to get cancer. I'd rather deal with malaria, and which can be cured. But Mr. Mugume from Bank of Uganda is increasing the rate so that I don't borrow to expand my business. On the other side, you have also tightened the expenditure in terms of getting opportunities and do businesses with you. And yet, you want this growth to come. Where will the growth come that we are projecting if we are not getting the resources that we need to expand our businesses, create employment, for you also to be able to get enough taxes? Could you please come back to that and clarify that actually the growth that we are looking at, we are likely to get it with this kind of intervention? Thank you. Thank you for those questions. PSST, you can respond to those. I don't know whether we still have. Okay.
Thank you. To start with yours, the growth is not felt in the pockets. Well, that is typical growth. Growth is necessary, but not sufficient. What we are talking about now is how do we make this growth broad-based? Of course, there are some pockets where the growth is felt, even much more in an overdose. So we want to look at how do we make the growth more broad-based, and that's why the parish development model is very, very critical to take the growth to every other Ugandan who has not seen growth or felt it. Around here, Greater Kampala Metropolitan, there's a lot of growth, and also it's being felt. But in some other places, we want this growth also to go there in the form of household and personal incomes. The four-wheel drives on the road, well, this is what I started with, that we are cutting expenditure. Is anybody doubting that we are cutting expenditure? Then you don't live in Uganda. We are actually cutting expenditure. It started a couple of years ago, and it is happening. What we would want is every Ugandan, especially those in the places of decision making, in the cabinet, in the parliament, in local councils, to ensure that we support the need to reduce on expenditure and preserve some resources for investment in business and wealth creation. Dr. Arthur, irrigation technology, definitely top on our priorities for the next budget is the small-scale solar-powered irrigation. That one has been spoken for many years. We are going to implement. So you are talking to the converted. You also amplified the public expenditure, you've answered. But I know in Uganda, we have this disease of everybody wanting a big car. And the policy allows them to have that car. So we need to go back and perhaps revise that policy as government. It's not a responsibility of the Treasury to say, no, we will not give you money when somebody is entitled. They're entitled for all those vehicles. Climate change fund, he has always, whenever he sees me, he tells me one thing: climate finance, create a fund. I told him we have set up a unit under debt in our ministry to target this particular area. So you are very well covered on this one. Climate financing, we are putting it top on agenda. Dr. Sechitoreko, my village mate from Butambala, we are really not relegating coffee anywhere. Coffee will continue to get support of government as it has been, and that money you hear called parish development model money, what has changed is the procurement officer. The procurement officer is no longer a central government or local government officer going into tender, looking for coffee nursery beds and buy a seedling at 3,000. We are now wanting the farmer to get the resources and become own procurement officer. But the strategy is this, or the goal is the same. We would want to see more support to coffee, and we are going to continue doing that. On taxes, because you are saying everybody is talking about supporting URA to build the capacity to tax, I don't think there are many actually governments around which have put resources in supporting the capacity of the private sector person than we are doing. The last time I checked, this calendar year, government is directly putting over 3 trillion shillings across the value chains to support this person whom we want to develop the capacity, to build the capacity so that they are able to pay tax. So we are supporting the private sector through financing, but also policy and a very, very good business environment so that they can be able to pay the tax without going into cash flow challenges. You are very right on the direct domestic investment. Where is the UIA? UIA, they have a mandate of promoting investment, not only to foreigners, but also to the indigenous. And they are doing that. Only that for Ugandans, we love to mainly go to a conference than going to UIA to complain or find out about an opportunity. The foreigners know where to go. The Ugandans mainly come to conferences, on radios, on TV to complain. But UIA has a very robust program of supporting all investors, domestic and foreign, to do business in Uganda, make money and build this country. Mr. Julius Mukunda, you are saying when we tighten the policy now, the economic policy, the combination of fiscal and monetary, we shall not be able to allow you to grow, to support the economic growth we are also targeting. Actually, what we are doing is to support you to be able to do business. How? By ensuring that we first flush out the cancer from your body. You can't think of beauty, because you know when they are going to treat your cancer, they remove all your blood, even the hair goes, and then for you, you look at in the mirror and you say, where's my beauty? You first get out the cancer, the beauty will come back later. So let us first do first things first. The stability of the economy, then that's when the businesses and households and everybody will be happy. However much you want the beauty at a time when the cancer is there, you will not be able. Thank you.
Thank you, PSST. I'm advised that we shall take 3 more questions. Just brief questions from this side. Preferably from Morris. Ladies. There is one behind.
Shaka, you could start here as I find the lady and UNDP here. Yes.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation, PSST. Mine is very simple. I'm just urging investors that deal in private credit markets to also, it's not all about giving money to different clients that approach us. I think it's also important for us to invest more in business development services as a private sector. That helps different businesses, smaller companies, the SMEs to improve their businesses, because some people come to us and you can find that they actually have the money, but they have poor cash management techniques. So I think as the private sector, especially the private credit investors, we should invest more in the business development services. Thank you.
My name is Lana Kembabazi with the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. I am one of the people who have shouted for subsidies, for targeted subsidies that could help the public transport sector. Not Alana who drives a car, but those who need taxis. And you've argued why, and I think there are good reasons on both sides. But what is the alternative to get us fuel? Because we can't wait for the market to adjust. We have been waiting since January. The cost of living, what we are hearing from deep in the village and everywhere, is just unbearable. It is tied to fuel. Beans are now at 5,000 shillings. So if you're not going to offer that beyond, doing the CBR rate and trying to curb inflation, that's a demand side measure. What are you going to do on that? And number 2, it's in response to the question around debt sustainability. Sustainability, if you're spending more than your budget of healthcare, education, and what on debt repayment, that's a bit of a problem. And I want to, when we're looking at some of the numbers, for example, we try to imagine what 5 days of debt repayment, that could fund our social protection for a year. So we need to see a stronger commitment. I think you're right by the traditional rubric. You say you're sustainable, but if we are looking from a human rights perspective, from the impact on people, and we're asking you to broaden that rubric by which you assess sustainability, it's not. And again, I come back to you as a young person and ask if you commit not to getting non-concessionary loans, or at least staying away from the... I want to hear that commitment so that a year later we can come back and say, how is government doing on this? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tangavel Palanivel. I am from the UN Development Program, UNDP. I have just 2 quick comments. The first comment is, yes, we see that the government managed the pandemic, also the economy very well. I think well done compared to many other countries. So the credit actually definitely goes to the government for managing the pandemic economy well. My actual comment is on the policy response. The effectiveness of policy response. I mean, that actually we need to monitor. For example, yes, the central bank has done very well in changing the central bank rate as a policy signal, as a policy rate. But the effectiveness of that changes is need to look into that, whether there is any changes in the actual lending rate of the commercial bank. And that's what we see, that the linkages between central bank rate, the policy rate, and the commercial bank lending rate or the deposit rate, the linkages is very weak here. So it's perhaps actually the government need to monitor that, how that actually the linkages could be strengthened between the central bank policy rate and the commercial bank lending rate or deposit rate, so that the effectiveness of the central bank policy could be actually realized in a more optimal manner. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Of course.
One more question. Thank you very much. My name is Moses Knondo from Vision Group.
Where? Where are you?
I'm here.
Okay, okay.
Yes. We would like to get clarity on the issue of middle income status as a country. At what stage are we? Because the president came out and announced that we had reached the lower middle income status. Then World Bank, I'm happy World Bank is represented here. They came out and disputed it. I have also had many economists actually disputing it, saying that at a period when we had just come out of COVID, our economic growth had reduced. It is not practically possible that our country could have jumped into the middle. And lastly, you in your release for Q1, you have released the money for recurrent expenditures, but you have not released the money for development expenditure. How will the economy experience recovery when development projects have been halted? But also many of these development projects, you got loans for them. So when you delay to implement them, it means you will have to pay more interest on these projects when you delay to implement. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. The issue of BDS, you are absolutely spot on. And as government, we are working on business development services with the Enterprise Uganda at my ministry, and a cross-section of other stakeholders. Very soon you will be seeing very well-structured efforts towards enshrining BDS in every intervention that we do undertake as government. Kembabazi, you are asking what's the alternative to getting the oil, to getting the fuel here in Uganda right now. The alternative is to use the oil we have sparingly, because you are not going to create oil from rain today. That oil is coming from somewhere under certain logistical challenges I've mentioned, and the best way forward is to ensure that whatever we are having is used very sparely. You know, when you have a crisis, and the word economics is actually about economizing, being able to work within the limits that you have. So don't expect the government to go and tell you that we are going to, I know there are certain answers that you want, the simplistic answers, but those answers don't work. If you want to check around the countries which went for them, where they are now. They have reversed, they are with us now on the policy direction. But on top of that, government is also expediting efforts to ensure that, number one, we increase on the reserves that we keep. Number two, that we get our oil out of the ground on budget and in time. Again and again we have explained this, but it seems they are not convincing answers to some of you. But that's what we shall be doing, because that's what actually works better. On debt sustainability, you want a stronger commitment from me. I strongly commit to you that we are going to keep our debt sustainable, and we do keep it and still sustainable. The need to monitor the monetary policy, especially the relationship between the CBR and the lending rate. I can't do his work. He's going to explain that one very well. Because some people feel when the central bank reduces the CBR, commercial banks don't respond as quickly as they do when they increase the CBR. I think that's what your dilemma is. The representative of the governor is here. He's going to explain to you that relationship. On the middle income status, Mr. Mulondo, I now suspect you are the one who wrote the headline in the new vision, which was misleading headline. Because my head of state was very clear when he was making his statement. It is on record. The GDP per capita of Uganda increased to $1,046. And he said that as per the World Bank, that ranking of countries in different sections, we are now at the gates of entering middle income, if especially we sustained this performance for the next 2 to 3 years. The president was very clear. He never declared Uganda middle income. It's not his business. Now I don't know where media you are getting this. Neither did World Bank come to say that, oh, we are now refuting the allegation by Uganda that it's middle income. Now, the record should be set very clearly that Uganda has seen substantial growth in our GDP and the GDP per capita. And therefore, going forward, and we are going to stay on that course. And going forward, our target is to ensure that we maintain this growth to enable us enter into that middle income group. The Q1 release, please just understand that Q1 we released only what is necessary to keep the government of Uganda functioning. We didn't release any extra money other than that objective. Are we clear? That's why I said that we have cut expenditure so that we can align ourselves with the monetary policy to first get out the inflation, then we shall go back to normal programming very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, PSST. He asked me to respond to a question on interest rates as a representative of BOU, but I don't know whether it is in order because I had reversed that function when I was starting. But in simple terms, we agree with you that probably we need to look at the effectiveness of what we call the transmission mechanism from the CBR to the lending interest rates. It is one of the issues that we have been grappling with. And the work we are doing on financial inclusion is part and parcel of the package we think that can really enhance the effectiveness. It is also correct to say that actually banks respond, but with a time, what we call a lag. So there is always a lag because some of the loans are contractual. Some of the loans you are seeing now being dispersed today started being negotiated about 6 months or 7 months down the road when the CBR was 6.5. So those are the negotiations that go on in a loan. So there's that time. So when the policy rate changes, you can't negate the fact that actually you had already entered into a contract. Some of those contracts have to go through as the loan evolves. However, also if you look at the loans, if you look at particular borrowers, what we call the prime borrowers. For example, even if you go to UK, what is interest rate on a credit card, which normally consumers use? You'll find it in the range of 10. Even when their policy rate was 0, the interest rate on a credit card was 10%. But so think about that. What will that translate into in the case of Uganda? So you are talking about personal loans. So you have to start separating particular borrowers. These are personal borrowers. These are business borrowers. I can also categorically state that there are some of the borrowers that borrow at the policy rate from commercial banks. So you have a situation where yes, banks respond with a lag. However, we also acknowledge that probably the effectiveness is not as strong as we would want to, would wish, simply because we are living in a financial sector that is still really at infant stage, and probably as financial inclusion really efforts bear fruit, we shall see some of that effectively being enhanced. With that, PSST, thank you for this session, and for all of you, thank you for participating. I hand back to Maurice. Thank you so much.
A bigger hand of applause for both Dr. Mugume and our PSST. Thank you so much for what should have been a longer conversation, because this other side is still protesting. They didn't ask all the questions. I'm hopeful that the panels that are coming may provide some time. Unfortunately, we will have to compress the next two sessions. The session 1 and session 2 we'll have to work within the time we have. Especially for session 1, we will definitely have less time than we had initially prepared for you. And please work with us. And I know I will work with the chair of the session. So I have been asked that we have a working coffee break. But before we do that, allow me to recognize the Honorable Minister of State for Microfinance and the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the Honorable Haruna Kasolo. Thank you very much for joining us. And also our development partners. I saw the IFC is here, Isabella. I've seen the EU here. And of course, we have the team from Germany. Thank you so much, our partners, for joining us for this conversation. We have several heads of our government agencies in this room, and please, if you when you can during lunch especially, not the coffee break, which I don't have, do engage them on the extended conversations. I saw the UCDA, Uganda Coffee Development Authority Executive Director is here in case somebody is looking for him. Dr. Yamremi is around, and several others who are in this room, and let's have these conversations continue. So we have a working coffee break, but as we do that, so that means we're not going to take a break. Whenever you want some coffee, you can walk to the back and pick coffee. I'll quickly transition to our next session, Climate Change in Uganda, Understanding the Implications and Policy Responses. Allow me invite the Honorable Amos Lugolobi to come and chair his session. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. I'll stand on the existing protocol to save time and introduce you to the topic that we are going to discuss. In this session, session 1, we are discussing climate change in Uganda, understanding the implications and the policy responses. Maybe to try and bring this into context, I'll just start by giving you some examples. At the time when we are designing Isimba Dam, the water levels of Lake Victoria were actually receding. However, in the last 2-3 years, we have seen the water level going up and becoming a major threat to the spillway that was designed at the time when water levels were declining. And you can now argue that because of the effects of climate change, we're experiencing these cyclical variations in terms of the supply of water into Lake Victoria. And all this is on the account of climate change. We have a huge water reservoir there, but the question of how we release that water without impacting on the infrastructure that was laid out at the time when water levels were low, I think is becoming a big challenge. Number 2, the second example, recently, I had gone to commission a small project where Finca Uganda will support the National Forest Authority at Baggio Forest to restore Baggio Forest by planting some 40 acres. Baggio Forest has over, I think, 11 square miles of land. Now, reaching there, I could not find a single tree in this Baggio Forest. And looking at the environment, the communities around, there was very little rain, very high temperatures, dry valley dams, and the cattle were actually dying for lack of water. No trees at all in this forest. You know, this is the trend that we are taking as a country, and we need to seriously move to restore the situation. Now, to lead us into that discussion, we have Mr. Tom Sengalama, Team Leader, Nature, Climate, Energy and Resilience in UNDP. Mr. Tom Sengalama is an environmental economist and a chartered environmentalist with 25 years of environmental leadership at national, regional, and international levels. May I invite you to take your seat, and may you please welcome him. He's going to be discussing Uganda's green growth strategy and its implications for achieving the middle income status. So we'll be articulating issues related to what is Uganda's green growth strategy, how can Uganda achieve upper middle income status with a green growth strategy as indicated in Vision 2040, and how best can Uganda utilize global climate financing options to achieve its growth agenda. And after his presentation, we shall have a presentation from Professor Nicholas Kilimani from Makerere University. Can I invite Professor Nicholas Kilimani? Is he around? Professor Nicholas, as he comes, is a Ugandan economist. He received the BA Major Economics degree from Makerere University in 2002 and an ERC Collaborative MA Economics degree from the University of Botswana and a PhD in Economics from the University of Pretoria. He is currently a lecturer in the Department of Policy and Development Economics at the College of Business Management Sciences, Makerere University, Kampala. His research interests are in the areas of environmental economics, resource economics, and development economics. So he will be presenting a paper on parched earth drought resiliency. Parched earth drought resiliency in the Ugandan economy. Now, and we have a lead discussant, Dr. Ronald Kagwa, who is a manager, production, trade, and tourism planning at the National Planning Authority. So may I invite the three to take their seats. Now, to kick off the discussion, I can now invite Mr. Tom Sengalama to take the podium. May you please welcome him once again.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Ministers present, the heads of government institutions present, the representative from the development partners, all distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon. I think we are entering afternoon now. I'm going to make a very short presentation to stimulate a discussion on green growth, looking at green growth as a driver of socioeconomic transformation in Uganda. Is it possible What do we need to do as a country? What do we have? Where are we going? What are we doing currently? And where do we need to go? I don't know whether this works. I'm going to try it out. Yes, sorry. Yeah, it works. I'm going to first quickly look at the green growth strategy. We all know that Uganda developed a green growth strategy and Vision 2040. And then we shall look at what does it mean if we chose to move business as usual without taking any interventions in the space of climate. And then we shall see what is the existing global climate change architecture, how does it look like, and how does Uganda fit in. And then we shall look at the climate finance needs for Uganda and where are they anchored. And then we shall quickly look at the contribution from the development partners and then open the discussion for your inputs. Yeah, Uganda around 3-4 years ago developed a green growth strategy that is anchored on the four areas. One, looking at production, access to resources, is looking at how do we improve efficiency in production systems and how do we make these production systems efficient. We have the PS talked very well about the stresses that we are facing. We have seen from the previous discussions how climate change has really become a big stressor through the prolonged drought that we have experienced in Karamoja, the raising of water levels, the floods in eastern Uganda, the landslides, and others. But what are the triggers? So in our production system, how do we ensure that these are well thought through, integrated into our production systems to make sure that we have a production system that is ecologically, environmentally and socially sustainable, that would drive green growth in this country for a long time? And how do we make sure that this growth is inclusive? And those are the areas that the green growth strategy in Uganda has really focused on. And once this is achieved, then we are going to have a development that is socially sustainable and does not contribute to the degradation of environment, rather contributes to the integrity and productivity of our natural capital that we have. But how does this look like in a real sense? We need to balance our 3 quadrants of socio-economic transformation. We drive economic growth, but ensure that this economic growth is inclusive. This economic growth leaves no one behind. This economic growth touches the key sectors of the economy. Access to health systems that are resilient to shocks, access to other social services, clean water, and many others, but also ensuring that our productive systems are all environmentally and socially sustainable. So on one hand, you have an inclusive growth where you are looking at growth that leaves no one behind, growth that expands opportunities for income for all the segments of people, that is gender sensitive, that is looking at youth employment, that is unlocking those sectors of production systems that bring in the biggest population of this country into the economic space. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, we are looking at production and consumption systems that are socially and environmentally sustainable, ensuring that our social capital, which is land and the associated natural resources, is not being degraded by our production system. Once we balance these three, then we know that we have an inclusive green growth. And that is what the green growth strategy is looking at. But to achieve this, a lot go in, and we are going to see what the commitments were, what the thinking were really when we are framing this green growth strategy. One, the guiding principle was balance the three, as I have articulated it. And the other one was ensure that the development enhances the productivity of the resource base in a sustainable way so that we don't suffer the shocks that we are suffering from. And the Vision 2040 recognizes that this cannot be achieved unless we tap into local and global climate financial architecture that exists to handle the stresses and shocks of climate that are tending to drive our economic backward. So these were the key elements. Now the question is it possible for Uganda to grow following a business as usual model, or can we achieve our Vision 2040 without taking proactive steps to address the areas of vulnerability? The current information, the current assessments that was done recently by the Notre Dame initiative on adaptation shows that Uganda is actually very vulnerable to climate change, 15th in the world and 49th least able to adapt and cope with the impacts of climate change. What does this mean? This means that business as usual is not going to take us anywhere. It means that as a country, we need to integrate policies that strengthen our ability to conserve our natural capital, to improve the productivity of our natural capital, and to build the necessary resilience to ensure that our economy is led by green growth principles. And there is evidence to that. There's a lot of evidence that shows that without implementing green growth principles, we are not going to move. One, agriculture contributes 60% of our industries. But we see that the soils on which agriculture is anchored are degrading at a very unsustainable rate. 41% of our agricultural land getting degraded. Soil erosion costing huge percentage of GDP to this country, and deforestation causing significant losses, as you can see from the statistics that are available. In the last, from 1990 to 2015, Uganda lost around 1.2 billion due to deforestation. And if this trend continues, then the dream of achieving middle income status may not be easily attainable. 17% loss in GDP due to soil erosion. When over 70% of our economy is anchored on agriculture, how do we then move forward? So these are some of the things. And the PS clearly said that the inflation in the recent past has been driven by food prices. So how do we address this inflation and stimulate growth unless we address the drivers that are affecting food production, improving soil productivity, making sure that agriculture is climate smart, investing in irrigation systems, but also investing in sustainable soil management, investing in agroforestry systems, ensuring that the stresses of prolonged drought do not impact our production system, investing in water access for animals, investing in veterinary services, and many other climate smart approaches that are going to ensure that we enhance productivity in a sustainable way, but also addressing other drivers of production. For instance, there are a lot of post-harvest losses that occur because of poor storage. Because of the climate change, you find people no longer predict rains well. You find you are harvesting at a time when you have intensive rain, and all your crops get damaged because you don't have the sun to dry. How do we stimulate use of solar dryers, for instance, to improve post-harvest handling? How do we ensure we have micro-irrigation schemes to ensure that we can grow throughout the year? The pests and diseases, how do we improve technologies to manage the emerging pests and diseases that are coming due to climate change? So all these are important questions that we need to reflect on as we try to move forward, as we try to advance our green growth agenda. Sorry. Now the question is, do we really need to invest in climate adaptation and resilience? There is sufficient evidence to show that actually investing in adaptation and investing in resilience has a lot of economic benefits. And actually, in all cases and in all studies that we have seen, you see that you save $4 for every dollar invested in adaptation. Be it in improving urban cooling through enhanced tree growing that has shown to reduce temperatures by 1% for around 77 million people. Be it water quality by enhancing forest protection in upper water catchments. Be it building resilient infrastructure. There is sufficient evidence to show that investing in resilience makes sense. Investing in climate-based practices, climate-based practices makes sense. And this has been well captured by the NDP 3. And when you read the NDP 3, you realize that the recognition that we need to have sustainable land management practices well anchored in our planning and management practices is at the center of the planning, realizing that our economy is anchored on agriculture. But how does the global climate, where do we get the resources? I felt that in this discussion we need to look at the global climate change, climate finance architecture and see, can we get support? Can we finance some of these initiatives? Yes and no. One, at the signing of the Paris Agreement, developed countries committed $100 billion to support developing countries to cope with the impact of climate change. This commitment has not yet been realized, but some significant amount of money has been realized and is being channeled through different multilateral and bilateral channels for developing countries to access. But even when 61% of this money, of global climate finance money, goes to non-OECD countries, we are still having a challenge in sub-Saharan Africa accessing it because of capacity challenges. We need to build the capacity to better access this money. But there is also a huge volume of money for climate in the private sector, 56%, that we need to tap, but we need to have the right incentives, right mechanisms to incentivize private sector to invest in climate-based practices. And most of this money has been found to be in mitigation. But how do we incentivize, given that we are already facing serious challenges with loss and damage? How do we incentivize investments in adaptation so that we have 50-50 investment or even more to make sure that we respond to the current challenges of climate change? And again, reflecting on the global climate change, climate finance architecture, we see that most of the commitments come from the developed countries, and a number of them have organized national institutions through which they channel these resources, and then these resources come through, some through multilateral organizations, others through private sector. But there is a realization that in order for us to get this money at country level, we need to be a little more organized. For instance, where countries have organized themselves in the form of what we were talking about, having a climate fund and other forms of attracting this money, we have seen them attract significant amount of climate finance. Take an example of the Amazon Fund, which attracted over $1 billion US dollars in climate finance because they organized a transboundary framework for them to support the conservation of the greater Amazon. And they have this fund that is helping them to finance a number of initiatives. The Benin National Trust Fund, the Benin National Fund for Climate Change is another example in Africa. And just here in Rwanda, they have a national climate fund that has attracted close to $1 million US dollars initially to start up financing this climate fund. So it has been realized that where you have organized streams, organized mechanisms, organized institutional frameworks that enhance transparency in the way the money comes in the way financial flow is coordinated, in the way this money is used, then you stand a higher chance of attracting some of these monies. But when you lack the framework, then it becomes very, very difficult. Now, given that there is evidence within Uganda's own documents, studies have been done, and it has been shown that green growth approach would actually contribute significantly to sustainable growth. 10% beyond business as usual, ability to create over 400 million jobs, 4 million jobs, and then the ability to keep our emissions low to our target by 24%, according to the NDC. But as I have said, we need to have good plans, good strategies to attract and to achieve some of these. One, we need to look at enhanced productivity. You are not going to achieve these figures if the land on which we depend is still degrading at the percentage I showed. You are not going to have this percentage when we are destroying the critical forests, we are destroying the wetlands, when the floods and landslides are destroying productive centers, for productive landscapes that we would use to incentivize this growth. But also we need to boost private sector confidence. We need to show that we are prepared and ready to address some of these drivers of vulnerability in order for us to attract private sector investment in this area. And then, of course, we need to address the incentive mechanisms, ensuring that negative incentives are eliminated and positive incentives are promoted. And there we are going to have the country start moving and start benefiting from the implementation of these green growth plans. But at the heart of that is translating this plan into actionable actions, committing resources to it, and then demonstrating commitment, and then asking for extra resources from private sector and from the global climate finance mechanisms to ensure that this is implemented. So, Uganda has carefully looked at the climate, the green growth needs, the drivers that would easily hold back our growth, and all of these have been well articulated in the NDC, in the National Determined Contribution. And this National Determined Contribution has actually defined the actual targets that Uganda would want to achieve. In the next 5 years, Uganda would want to reduce the emissions by 24.7%. And Uganda has under the NDC, a monitoring and verification system has been developed to monitor this and report this in order again to build donors' confidence. And the NDC has very clear targets in our key sectors, agriculture, energy, and others. So the need is well defined, and the resourcing is well defined. In the next 5 years, for Uganda to be able to implement all these commitments in the NDC, Uganda will need 22 billion USD to implement this NDC. And we know very well that this money can't come from the Uganda's economy, given the, first of all, it is not right that it all comes from Uganda's economy because we are contributing to a global good. So there's a global commitment for developed countries to support in financing some of these commitments. But two, Uganda would not have internal financing capacity to raise this money in 5 years. So there would seriously be urgent need for Uganda to mobilize climate finance from elsewhere. But this would require 3 to 4 things. One, we would need to capitalize on innovative climate financing mechanisms and using different instruments. For instance, there is the whole space of carbon markets, which is not tapped. How does Uganda develop guidelines, frameworks, and approaches to maximize the revenues from carbon markets? Are we ready? Do we have the capacity? Uganda needs to really look at public and private sector partnerships in leveraging climate finance. And doing this, it will help, one, sharing the risks, but two, leveraging extra financing from private sector. But the little of public finance resources that may be available could be used to de-risk investments by private sector in some of these areas, so that private sector is encouraged to put more money in investing in low carbon technologies, in other climate change mitigation and adaptation initiatives. And at the heart of this, we need to have a transparency mechanism that shows what we are doing, how the resources are being invested, and what are the gains, what are the gains from these investments. So once you have a good and transparent tracking mechanism, then you increase the donor confidence in putting in more resources, you encourage more private sector to invest because you can demonstrate value, and then you are able to attract much more climate finance. But at the heart of that, we need to build the capacity of our MDAs, capacity of our private sector, and all sectors of the economy to ensure that, one, they understand this, but two, they can take forward some of these initiatives. I did show the global climate finance architecture, and here we are talking about a few areas where climate finance has been sourced. One, the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is one of the biggest, is probably the biggest platform through which climate finance is being channeled by these big donors you have seen in the chart. And Uganda needs to prepare to attract as much as this. You did see from my earlier presentation that even when there is global climate finance available, 61% going to non-OECD countries, Sub-Saharan Africa is still getting less than 5%. So what is it?
Tom, may I interrupt you?
Yes, sir.
You know, we're exceedingly running out of time. So may I ask you to summarize in the next 2 minutes?
Yes, that's fine. So, yeah, sorry for that interruption. So we need to build capacity for the country to be able to access these funds from Green Climate Fund. There are other funds from GF which are looking at a number of initiatives, but there are also funds from bilateral donors and from the World Bank. The World Bank is one of the biggest donors and has special funds, Climate Investment Fund, there is Forest Carbon Partnership Fund and others, where Uganda can tap resources to invest in climate investments. But also we have seen a lot of interest by private sector in sectors like forestry, energy and other investments where we can provide the necessary incentives for the country to attract more finances in this space. As I conclude, there is no doubt that green growth is the right pathway for Uganda, given that we are a natural resource-based country, given that over 60% of our industries are based on agriculture, given that our economy is 70% reliant on our natural capital, even beyond. But in order for us to achieve this, we need effective and integrated government policies that really address the wide drivers of economic growth, including addressing the drivers of vulnerabilities. We need to have an economy that is more inclusive, that leaves no one behind. We need to promote opportunities to access incomes by the lowest people. And of course, the parish model, the parish development model may be one of the pathways that is going to help us achieve this. But also consider the wider determinants of development, access to health, clean water, education, clean and affordable energy. This will be very important. But above all, we have realized that unless we have a framework that would help this country to attract global climate finance, that would streamline the flow of climate finance in this country, we are going to keep firefighting, but we shall not attract as much. Because having a climate finance facility would help us to streamline and to enhance transparency in the ways that these resources come in, how they are managed, and how they are shared and used to cause impact. So we think this is one of the areas, and we have seen that countries which have established these specific financing mechanisms have been able to attract significant climate finance. I thank you.